Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. This is a story of two agents, one Indian, one American. Let's start with the American agent, David Coleman Headley, half American, half Pakistani. He was an informant for the US Drug Enforcement Agency. He infiltrated the Lashkar-e-Taiba in 2006. Evidently, he was part of a US effort to locate 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden. This is the terrorist who had killed thousands of Americans September 11, 2001. But Headley and his partner, a Canadian businessman, also of Pakistani descent, Tahawur Rana, actively participated in planning for the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai. That's in 2008, in which 166 people were killed, including 6 Americans. They were murdered by Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists in Mumbai. Now, India has been asking for the extradition of David Headley, but this was turned down by the US, and Headley is now serving a 35-year jail sentence in a US prison. The other agent in our story is Vikas Yadav. He was a CRPF officer, formerly with the r&aw. He was in fact dismissed after the US made these allegations of his involvement in a plot to kill Gurpatwant Singh Pannun. And who's Gurpatwant Singh Pannun? He's a Canadian US national who's been designated a terrorist by India. Now, India has termed the case against Yadav as baseless allegations. But even if there was some truth to it, Yadav had only conspired to assassinate Pannun, a terrorist declared by India. There was no actual act of violence. And the irony of this case against Vikas Yadav, is the fact that Gurpatwant Singh Pannun is alive and he is well in the United States. He continues to advocate secessionism and violence against India. In fact, he's just warned Indians of attacks on Air India flights between the 1st and the 19th of November. And there's an Indian intelligence agent who's in the dock for trying to assassinate a designated terrorist. On the News9 Plus show today, we're looking at what options India has. What are the big questions in this case? Question number 1, does the US have double standards when it comes to its own national security interests? How strong is the case against Vikas Yadav? What happens next in this case, for instance? And finally, can India still ask for David Headley's extradition, one of the masterminds of one of the worst terror attacks on Indian soil in 2008? Joining me to discuss this are Dr. Rajiv Nanda, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court of India, Adit Kothari, Geopolitical and Foreign Affairs Expert. In the studio, I have with me Justin Thomas, and also joining us is Major General V.K. Datta, formerly with the Indian Special Forces. He's held several tenures in Special Forces and Special Units. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. General Datta, I want to start by asking you this. Do as we say, but not as we do. Does the United States have double standards when it comes to its own foreign interests, its own national security interests? It assassinates people who are anti-US, wherever they are, whichever part of the world. But if any other country allegedly tries to do the same, their agents are indicted in US courts and their summons are made for their extradition. What strikes you about this particular case, the difference between David Headley, who is a US agent who's planted into the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and allegedly Vikas Yadav, who's supposed to have conspired to kill a terrorist who India has declared a terrorist, who's planning attacks against Indian citizens on Indian soil, who's hiding in the US and freely preaching violence against Indian citizens? General Datta.
Yeah, Sandeep, this is one country which has carried out attacks of all kinds all over the world and has got away with impunity. If you talk about human rights violations, well,
Right.
Here is the country. If you talk about planned attacks on foreign leaders or say military leaders in an international arena, done by the USA. This is the country. Now you can't say, there's an old saying, you must have heard, my dog is Tommy and your dog is Kutta type. So
Yes.
this is the equation. Now, if US wants to apply the same standards, they should also be held liable for the same activities they have done internationally, and they can be tried in the International Court of Justice. So now comes the question that what has Yadav done? He's done nothing. There's nothing you can prove in the court of law
Right.
against him.
Right.
Now, as far as Reddy is concerned, he was part of a complete conspiracy in which a number of foreigners were killed in 2611 attacks in Mumbai.
Yes.
Why not he be sent back to India for trial or for whatever the Indian law holds? Because this act was done on the Indian soil by the proxies of Pakistan and by Pakistan direct involvement by ISI. So therefore, how can America say that the Indian agent was trying and planning? I'm also trying and planning.
Right.
I want Pannun dead.
Right.
Can you try me for that? I want him dead. I
Right.
want every enemy of India dead wherever he is.
Right.
So that is it. So
Absolutely.
therefore, when you talk about law, when you talk about the equation between nations, you can't have double standards.
Yes.
Just because you are a superpower, you got a lot of money, you are economically powerful, your dollar is floating around all over the world. That is it. So it is a question, jiski lathi uski bhans.
Right.
So the other party,
Yes.
we as Indians,
Yes.
are largest democracy in the world, don't get cowed down by this.
Absolutely.
And if you are going to
Yes,
push
yes.
us somewhere further, we will retaliate, definitely.
That seems to be the case in this case, at least from the facts of the case that have been put out in the United States, that Vikas Yadav conspired to kill a designated terrorist on US soil. Of course, that nothing prevents the US from doing the same. It has killed its own citizens on foreign soil wherever they've been found advocating violence and terrorism against its own interests. But I want to ask Dr. Rajiv Nanda, the contours of this case. Dr. Nanda, Vikas Yadav is being charged in a US court with a conspiracy to plan the assassination of a US national on US soil. How strong is the case against him? Based on the evidence that you've seen, you've studied the court documents that have been put out there since last year. How much of a case does the US have to demand Vikas Yadav's extradition?
See, as far as extradition is concerned, there is a treaty between India and USA, which was signed on 25th of June 1997, and
Yes.
it came in effect in 1999 July.
Right, right.
I think it was 21st or 22nd of July.
Yes.
It has various provisions under which either of the signing states can request the other state to hand over a particular person to the other country, to the requestee country, that so and so is a criminal under my law, and so is a criminal under your law also. It has various articles.
Right.
But I must here say, if Article 5.1 of this treaty is read,
Right.
India has all the rights to deny the extradition because this is politically motivated.
Right.
If there is a politically motivated, the requesting state is making a politically motivated request, the
Right.
requestee state can always decline, and so can India do in this case. Because Vikas Yadav, these are all planted things. There is nothing against him.
Right.
If we compare David's case,
Yes.
we had put in much stronger case at that
Yes.
point of time. And I must point out here
Right.
that it was the treaty which came in effect in 1999 has
Yes.
a clause under Article 1
Yes.
that even if the criminal had committed offense prior to signing of this, he too could be handed over. So answering your first part, whether we can still make a request about David Headley, yes, we can make a request. And second part, whether we should hand over Vikas Yadav, no. This is a politically motivated. Under 5.1, India can always refuse, say, point blank, no, this is a politically motivated thing. I decline, I put my foot down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Doctor, for putting that in perspective. The fact that we can actually turn down Vikas Yadav's extradition under that Article 5.1 that you mentioned. But, you know, speaking of 2611, some months back we spoke with then National Security Advisor, Mr. M.K. Narayanan, about what the US knew about 2611. Just listen to what he has to say.
David Hadley was a double agent. The Americans did not want him to be fully exposed. So all that he probably shared with the Americans was not shared with us in terms of intelligence. If we had that, I'm sure that we would have been able to deal with the situation far better. So, yes, the scale of the attack surprised us. I would even say shocked us. The Hadley confession came much after the Americans had milked him of everything that he had to do. But that was only confirmation of what we had. It took us a little time. I mean, there was intelligence is anticipation followed by investigation. So the investigation confirmed what we had already anticipated as far as this was concerned.
You know, Adit, this is a raw wound for Indians, even 16 years after 2611. The fact that the United States, which is a close strategic partner of India, actually knew about the 2611 attacks and chose not to inform us, not give us the full picture, as you heard the then NSA say. Why is it that we never really took this up with the Americans in the way that we ought to have back then? And is it too late for us to do anything about this case now?
Thanks for having me, Siddharth. I think first and foremost, there seems to be a lack of reciprocity that Indian diplomacy has had for a very long time. Maybe due to the fact that the Americans have always been extremely powerful and have been extremely dominating in a certain sense. That could be one of the reasons, but also because we've relied on them for a lot of intelligence gathering and sharing. In this instance, as Mr. Narayan clearly pointed out, that because Daud himself, in this case, Daud Gilani and David Headley, because he was so close in proximity to the American intelligence establishment, especially to the DEA, because he was essentially working as a drug gathering intelligence officer. So they probably fear that he may be able to provide India with much more information than actually needed, and which is why his extradition was never approved, and it will never be approved in the near future, as compared to someone like Tahir Rana, whose extradition has actually been approved by the Los Angeles court. It's a different matter that his lawyers are now basically using other tactics to basically frustrate the Indian agencies. But to the fact that Western hypocrisy exists, this is a case in point in time. All of these issues, if we go back to the Khalistan and the Kashmir, the Jammu Kashmir issue, at the end of it all, at the heart of it all, lies British intelligence, the American intelligence, the Anglo-Saxon enterprises. And they are the ones who've created these Frankensteins. There was a report which was filed by Colin Bloom for the Westminster for the British Parliament last year, which basically called out the government to say that you've created these problems, and today these problems are essentially becoming the problem for the civil society at large. So, something needs to be done about it, and the political correctness basically needs to be kicked into the dustbin.
Absolutely.
So, Siddharth?
Yes. Thanks.
At the heart of it all.
Yes. Yeah, please continue.
At the heart of it all lies the Western hypocrisy, the double standards, where their terrorists are everybody's terrorists, but our terrorists, our criminals, our extremists become their asylum seekers, their political asylum seekers, or their citizens.
Absolutely. Western hypocrisy, Western double standards, and the lack of reciprocity, as Adit Kothari just told us. Justin, does that surprise you in the very least?
No, it doesn't, because if you've seen the US government records on, let's say, Pannun's case, everywhere it looks like as if the fact that he's a terrorist, he's been inciting violence, is nowhere, it's missing completely.
Yes.
It's like they have, compartmentalized it, just like the Niger case across that pond from in Canada,
Yeah.
where they don't talk about the violations, the visa violations, they don't talk about the criminal activities, or Pannun being threatening Indian airliners, threatening the Prime Minister, different embassy people, everything is missing. Only compartmentalized factors like, he is an US citizen, he's an activist. So it reminds me of a gangster series in India where a politician goes to the gangster and says, hey, your son has done this, and the gangster looks at him and says, you know what, it doesn't matter what he has done, what matters is he's my son. So I think that's the treatment that these guys are giving these people. So they might be terrorists, they might be plotting, but it doesn't matter as long as they are US citizens.
They're US citizens and they've safe haven. And just a few hours ago, as I was just telling you all, the Pannun, Gurpatwan Singh Pannun has asked Indians not to fly between the 1st and the 19th of November because something could go wrong with the aircraft. And we know what happened back in 1985. So these are threats that cannot be taken lying down. And this is the irony of the situation, Justin. The fact that you have a US citizen calling for terror attacks against Indian airlines from a safe haven in the United States, and the US does nothing about it, doesn't even mention it, doesn't bring it up in any of these conversations.
What do you think would have happened if that guy was an Arab and he was talking about a Jewish airliner?
There would be a Predator drone flying over him in a few...
there's a very lot of different pointers that you have to look into. It's not a clean thing that they're just saying it and giving it to you. There are a lot of ifs and buts and commas and asterisks that you have to go through. All that, by the end of it, the case is gone. Because the Headley case clearly, in 2015, I believe that they had agreed to not extradite in exchange of information provided by David Headley. So David Headley is not going to be ever extradited. He's going to be forever, because there are so many DAS secrets that I think the US will not like him to spell out their business in Afghanistan.
Yes.
How much the money, drugs that they infiltrated there to provide weapons. So that kind of, legacies.
So, Justin, because I researched this Headley case, a very curious case of the double agent Headley for my book, and that's when I realized that he was actually infiltrated into the Lashkar because they believed, the US intelligence believed, the Lashkar had a hotline to Al-Qaeda, and therefore the Lashkar leaders would know where Osama bin Laden was hiding, and that was the whole purpose of infiltrating Headley as a double agent. And it only turns out that he was exposed 2 years after the 26/11 attacks because he turned out to be a triple agent, that he was actually planning to carry out attacks against Europeans. The Danish newspaper which published the Prophet Muhammad cartoons, the plan was for David Headley and his bunch of terrorists to go and attack that newspaper, take those journalists hostages, decapitate them, create a 26/11 kind of scenario in Copenhagen. And that is when the US intelligence woke up and said, this guy has gone rogue. And that's when they arrested him and they tried him and they've put him into jail for 35 years. So the earliest we can see David Headley is 2048.
So I think there is very common, that Anglo interests that is across both
convergence of interests. The Five Eyes converge on a number of interests. Dr. Rajiv Nanda, we are looking at the number of fugitives that have been extradited on Indian request. So far, 19 have been extradited from the UAE, 9 from the US, and only 1 fugitive from the UK on charges of murder and criminal conspiracy. And you have this conspiracy of silence among the Five Eye countries that whenever it comes to Khalistan or so-called political issues like this, they all seem to close ranks. So Gurpatwan Singh Pannun can freely move between the US and the Canada and possibly even the United Kingdom, and you can't do anything about it. What is it that we can really do, Dr. Nanda, as we are democracies, we play by the rules? How can you highlight this politically motivated cases like this, the fact that there is a lack of reciprocity when you're talking of being strategic partners with the United States or with Britain or whichever Five Eyes countries you have, when it comes to issues like this, we seem to have very little heft.
See, it is very unfortunate. When a treaty is signed between the two independent sovereign powers,
yes,
both the signing partners are equally responsible for all the act theoretically to say.
Yes.
But here we always see that US has been doing the dadagiri all over. When it comes to, as the earlier speaker said, when it comes to their terrorists, it is everybody's terrorist. When it comes to
Yes.
our terrorists, it is, I mean, nothing. We have perhaps also lacked when it came to Pannu's case. We, to my understanding, have not been able to provide very much strong evidences against him, except being very vocal about.
Right.
No solid evidences have been, because our intelligence didn't have that much.
Right.
But nevertheless, I will say that now, since we are aware of it, and now
Yes.
since we have that material against him, we can still put it forward and say that please expedite him, extradite him. This is like we have to play very smartly on the diplomatic channel, press his extradition. Otherwise, there's nothing that we can do except to break the treaty.
Right, absolutely. We have no options except to break the treaties. But General Datta, I understand your angst about rotten apples like Gurpatwan Singh Pannu. You fought insurgency, you fought Khalistani terrorists, you fought all manner of terrorists for decades. And now you see this very incredible scenario where you have our strategic partners across the Atlantic who are actually sheltering elements like this, who are inciting a movement that soldiers like you and many others like worked very hard to fight in the 80s and the 90s. What is it that India can really do now in 2024 to ensure that people like Gurpatwan Singh Pannu are not a threat?
See, the thing is that you must also remember that there's an election due in the US now.
Yes.
And all this activity being done supporting Pannu is to garner the votes of the so-called people who want to create Khalistan in India.
Yes.
It is maybe a Khalistan may get created in Canada and not in India, because no Indian Sikh who is a true Sikh and citizen
Yes.
of India wants a Khalistan within the country. It is the people and the governments outside who are
Yes.
using these elements in twisting the arm of India for any personal gain which they might use in the future. But
Right.
that's what I said, that India is the largest democracy. India has got the strength to fight back and protect the national interest within India, to ensure that the India remains united as a nation and no power in the world is able to divide us. And this particular handle people have been using, whether it was Khalistan or it was J&K or
Yes.
it is the Northeast. And these are the powers which are involved. So it is a political game being played to garner votes in the upcoming election, where Trump on one side, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris fighting as opponents, and each one of them trying to woo the other to garner a vote. And same is the case what's happening in case of Israel. They're being
Yes.
held back to strike Iran. That is
Right.
all related to these elections.
Yes.
What Trump wants and what Joe Biden wants. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, people have done their job in the past. People will continue doing it in the future, and India will remain intact and strong in times to come. And all such elements will find end one day, and maybe they'll meet an end in the same manner.
Right, they'll meet an end in some manner or the other. General Datta, we'll end this on a very positive note, as you just said. The fact is that, dogs bark, but the caravan continues. The caravan of India continues as it has for hundreds of years. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening to talk about the US double standards. I mean, there's one thing, Justin, that you can fight in the courts, which is the extradition of Vikas Yadav. There's no case, as Dr. Nanda was mentioning, that you have Article 5A, 5.1, it's a politically motivated case. It's another thing, but when you see our strategic partners, so-called strategic partners, pushing the agenda indirectly of secessionists, allowing them safe havens, allowing them to preach hatred, preach attacks, terror attacks against Indian citizens of the kind that people like Nijar and Gurpatwan Singh Pannu have been doing. So that's something that really, saddens us over here when we talk about this so-called two-way street that doesn't seem to exist. There's just a one-way street when it comes to the West and its agenda. That double standards that we are talking of, politically motivated allegations that we were we just heard from our panelists. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajiv Nanda, Major General Datta, Adit Kothari, and of course my colleague, Justin Thomas, in the studio here. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend the 16th BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia. He's going there at the invitation of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The summit begins tomorrow. Now, the Prime Minister is attending the BRICS summit at a time when he's facing diplomatic pressure from the Five Eye Western Bloc led by the US over the Indian government's alleged involvement in an assassination attempt in the US and also killing of a Canadian national in Canada, which the US and Canada believe is carried out by Indian agencies. Now, this comes despite India being a partner in the Quad and in other groupings. So, will India actually look at the BRICS summit to offset Western pressure? Can the BRICS, in fact, create a new world order which gives a bigger voice to the global South? Joining me to discuss this today are Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at the MPIDSA, Ambassador Deepak Vora, former Indian diplomat. And in the studio, I have with me my colleague Anthony Rosario. But first, I want to go over to Alexandra Berman, who's the head of South Asia and the Middle East Department of TV BRICS International Media Network. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the News9 Plus show. Alexandra, I want to start by asking you this, to just set it up for us. The BRICS summit begins tomorrow. It comes at a very interesting time in geopolitics of the world, battle between the East and the West, of course. Tell us about why Kazan was chosen for the BRICS 2024 summit. It's 1,000 kilometers east of Moscow. Why not Moscow or St. Petersburg? Does this actually signify Russia's eastern shift towards China and India?
Hello, Sandeep. Thank you for having me here. It's a big honor to be here today at the News9 Plus show. And thank you for the questions. It's an actually interesting thing that so far none of the summits of BRICS that were held in Russia were held in Moscow and St. Petersburg. In 2015, we had a summit which was held in Ufa city, which is the capital of Bashkortostan Republic.
Right.
And in 2009, the first BRICS summit was held in Yekaterinburg, the capital of Sverdlovsk region. So Russia showcases remarkable diversity of these regions. I think it's one of the things that India and Russia shares, actually. And it shows that not only Moscow, not only the capital of the country can be the venue for such a large-scale international event, but also that our regions are also capable of doing that. So first thing that I want to mention is that Tatarstan is a very well-developed region. It is one of the most developed regions in terms of economy, if we speak about Russian regions. And that is the first thing. Second thing is that Tatarstan showcases Russia's diversity in terms of culture and religion as well, because as we know that Tatarstan is a very multi-confessional region.
Yes.
And this showcases Russia's pluralism, which can also be said about the BRICS group in general.
Absolutely. Tatarstan being a showcase for the diversity that the BRICS summit, in fact, stands for. And, a quick follow-up question, Alexander, to what you just told us. How is Prime Minister Modi perceived in Russia? This is the second visit that Prime Minister Modi is going to undertake to the Russian Federation in just 3 months. How do the Russian people generally perceive Prime Minister Modi?
So Prime Minister's visits to Russia this year, they generate immense interest, not only from the expert community, but also from the general public as well.
Yes.
And as we remember, the first visit of Prime Minister was the first official visit of Mr. Modi after he was re-elected. So it also says something about India-Russia relations. Well, I completely agree that our leaders share very warm, close, and friendly relations between each other in a personal level. And we can see it at the official meetings, at non-official meetings. They are always held in a very friendly and amicable manner.
Absolutely,
So,
yes.
Well, what I want to say about the perception of Prime Minister Modi by Russian audience is that from here we can clearly see that the ability of Prime Minister to maintain balance in foreign policy when we speak about cooperation of India with its foreign partners,
Yes.
by prioritizing the interest of India and of its people as well. And from the Russian side, we can see great respect and understanding of this policy.
Absolutely.
And both to the country and to Prime Minister, as he is the major, the person who represents the country.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alexandra. I'm going to follow that up with a question to Ambassador Deepak Vora. Ambassador Vora, timing of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia. He's under tremendous pressure. If you look at it internationally from the headlines, if you're looking at Canada, the United States, Pannun, Niger, Khalistan, gangsters, and all of that. India is supposedly involved in all kinds of international conspiracies against the gallant Five Eyes countries. You see this as a coincidence that all of these allegations come at a time when Prime Minister Modi is headed to Russia for his BRICS summit, and it's his second visit to Russia, incidentally, in 3 months.
Always a pleasure to be with you on your amazing channel. Of course, you are brilliant, the way you put it across. I was listening to you and to our colleague who spoke earlier, and then you have Dr. Rao and our other colleague. You don't need me. These people are outstanding in every which way. Let me just very quickly, if you give me a couple of minutes, quick refresher.
Sure.
You know, when the Second World War ended, the international political and financial architecture that was designed, what was it? It was developed dominant and developing dependent.
Right.
So when we created rackets like the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, they all created to perpetuate this system. However, by the turn of the century, the developing nations, with a few exceptions, realized that we are still where we were when decolonization gave us independence. We began to look for a new paradigm. Then China came along, you know, in shining armor on a white horse, but it flattered to deceive. Was seen as a ruthless predator. So by the mid-2010s, the search began again. And who turned out to be the most reliable and trustworthy development partner? It is India. Bharat has the required political, economic, demographic, and technological strength. That's why everybody and his grandmother and the grandmother's neighbor wants to join this organization. I call it the Info Wali Sanstha, BRICS. Fortunately, it's not called Stones, otherwise you would have had a lot of memes around this place. Now, what we are seeing today, therefore, sir, with, of course, one is the bilateral relationship between India and Russia, which is progressing a bit. This morning, a few hours ago, I was physically present when the Prime Minister spoke to a group of eminent people. Let me assure you, there was no tension on his face. He didn't appear stressed, nor is India stressed. The fellows who are trying to create trouble are these guys with the one eye. No, 5 people are supposed to have 10 eyes, but these guys have only 5 eyes. So these one-eyed fellows with 5 eyes, 6 legs, 7 noses, 8 heads, whatever they are, these characters. I mean, this kind of nonsense doesn't impact him. Let me put it to you again. You mentioned the word Khalistan. Sir, I come from the Punjab. Not more than 50 people in my wonderful state have even, care about Khalistan. If there is an issue, it's going to be in Canada. They had better deal with it because the thing is going to come to bite them. I mean, the monster that Frankenstein created coming to bite them and coming very, very quickly. In fact, it's already started. So what we are going to see in Kazan, the beautiful capital of Tatarstan, by the way, I've spent some time there. The mosque is totally amazing. And the people just so pleasant. That's why he's doing it. Now, there's one other reason. You heard about this joker from Ukraine. We call him the clown of Kiev. He's going to say they are doing it in Kazan because my missiles can hit Moscow and I will do it. The fellow has lost his marbles. So he's moving 1,000 kilometers to the east. You're going to probably have something like this coming out from the fellow. He's like an unguided missile that doesn't work. So my feeling is, sir, that this is going to focus on what BRICS is meant to do, an alternative. It's an alternative to the Western dominated system. Plus, the Prime Minister will use this opportunity to again hug Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin loves to be hugged by Narendra Modi. Mr. Putin gave an interview just this morning, which I saw, which said he is my trusted friend and so on, and brother, all kinds of wonderful things he said. So I see the benefits coming to this, and sir, as they say in Hindi, if you don't mind, "Jalta zamana hai to jalne de, party ko yun hi baby chalne de." It's quite.
Absolutely.
I have a question
Alexandra,
for-
I'm going to translate that for you later. But Anthony,
Yeah.
before I, come to you, I'm just going to ask Dr. Rao this. Dr. Rao, I've heard this description of the BRICS summit as being a buffet, as opposed to a set course dinner where everyone sits down and they're served. Someone decides the menu and then the person comes and he serves them the menu. And as opposed to that, the BRICS is a buffet. You can pick and choose what you want from the menu, right? And obviously that possibly is an issue there because some countries, some very key partners, partner countries like China and India have very serious differences, especially on the border issues. So a lot of commentators say that economics is what is going to drive the partner countries of BRICS, the economies of all these countries. The fact that, the BRICS is primarily an economic forum. It's got a combined GDP of what, $29 trillion, 27% of the global GDP, in fact. How do you see these countries pushing the economic agenda at Kazan? Do you see that as becoming, an alternative to the Western-led institutions?
Well, Sandeep, so thank you for your question and thanks for having me here. And after all the strategic humor and the brilliance that Ambassador Vora brings out every time, I mean, there's very little left to speak. But yes, you asked me a specific question, which is on the economic vision.
Yes.
So, well, on the one hand, we have to understand that if there's any grouping in the world today that has both China and India, by default, it is going to be, a grouping with huge economies and a lot of population, and in that sense, a lot of geopolitical traction. But
Yes.
I think we just need to be a little careful about pushing a common economic agenda. Honestly, if you see carefully, you don't really have a common economic agenda. I mean, there are countries in the region like China and Russia, and China and Russia and India bilateral ties are separate from this. But if you look at the BRICS forum, if you look at the rest of the countries who are pally with China, and especially the way China looks at this entire BRICS expansion, right? I mean, you do know that India is there because India is wanting to have its multipolar base, to expand its economic outreach to Middle East and beyond, and also remain in the grouping so that the global south does not really fall completely into China's lap. I mean, that's one part.
Yes.
The other part why India remains in this grouping is because it is a true commitment to India's multi-alignment. I mean, the reason that India today can be at the same table when it comes to BRICS and SCO and then G20 and other being invited by G7, I think that essentially is a kind of a reiteration that India truly does believe in multi-alignment, and today India would like to keep these options open. And I guess this is something that India has always stood for and conveyed to its partners, both when it comes to Russia and and when it comes to the West. So I think that there is strategic clarity on the fact that India and a multi-aligned India is perhaps much more useful to the world, to the global south, and perhaps even to the West, because tomorrow when they need to speak to somebody and get people on board and have some negotiations around Ukraine war, the only credible player that can really bring everybody together is India. So I guess I look at it in that perspective. The other thing is that we need to be careful, yes, because let's understand that BRICS actually grew out of the RIC triangle, the Russia, India, China triangle, and the Russia, India, China triangle was a strategic triangle that was put together at a particular time in 1998 when the collective West had put sanctions on India for our nuclear, weapons, tests, etc. Now, but you know that so much in geopolitics has changed. So I think that there should be a kind of awareness to identify too much with the RIC, because it's not just Russia, but it is also China there.
Yes.
And India does not officially believe, you have the foreign affairs minister saying again and again that we do not believe that, undermining the dollar is in our interest, because today's, if you look at the trade that India has with the West. So I think the thing is that when India goes to these forums, it is a reiteration that, listen, we have strategic autonomy to have an independent policy. We also have a commitment to the global south, and we stand by that commitment. But at the same time, and we would like to be a part of the success story of the global south. I mean, you look at India's diplomacy by and large. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that India in any way identifies with the calls to sort of undermine the current order
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
frankly, it is not as India's interest. I mean, if you just look 2 days ago, what happened, you saw that, President Xi Jinping, for example, I mean, he was in his military attire and asking the entire Chinese military establishment to be ready for
Yes.
war.
Right.
Okay. Now, the other thing is that yesterday we
I
heard
see
from the
Ambassador Vora cracking up.
Yeah.
That's, Xi Jinping is Ambassador Vora's favorite person of interest.
Yeah, so I mean, it's better to not somewhere, leave things to these kind of details. I guess
Yes.
perhaps strategic realism is what the need of the hour is, but at the same time, hats off to Indian diplomacy
Yes.
that at a very, very difficult time has balanced this beautifully, no matter
Yes.
what kind of pressure came up. And finally, Sandeep, allow me to
Yes.
make this final point, which is that I think India's rise, okay, shouldn't really be confused with what the Five Eyes or Two Eyes or One
Yes.
Canada can do to us, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
today, if you look at whatever is happening in Indo-Pacific, the economic security that
Yes.
everybody wants in Indo-Pacific, none of those plans would work if India was not a part of that, right?
Absolutely,
So I think
yes.
that is also something that we need to understand, and India shouldn't really be, sort of shook in its confidence matrix,
Yes.
okay, with especially somebody coming and putting some allegations. I mean, they make a mockery of themselves, don't they?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Rao. Yeah, Five Eyes shouldn't bother you. India should continue with its march forward. But, I have my colleague Anthony here smiling very knowingly because he's just completed a documentary on the shifting world
with
order.
Ms. Gulati, but
Yes. And tell us, Anthony, what your learnings were while putting this together. This fact that Dr. Rao mentioned that it actually is a triumph of diplomacy for India. The fact that we've, at a very trying time globally, when you're looking at the world being polarized in East and West, and you have India in the middle saying, I will do business with both blocks because it's in my national interest.
I think I was left with more questions than answers, to be honest, and the questions are quite a few in my case. The first being the fact that while we spoke about BRICS being this place where you can order from the menu and not,
yes.
and not a fixed menu. But there's also commentary and there's also significant some developments that indicate over the past years that China has come to dictate that menu, especially if we talk about Iran's inclusion. There was a lot of opposition. So China emerging as this, BRICS was obviously formed to counter Western dominance, but if you have a Chinese dominance within BRICS, how do we address that? That is question number one. Question number two, all of the US's and the West's adversaries in one basket. You already had China, Russia, and now you also have Iran. So how is the diplomatic tightrope? I mean, there was already a very, very thin tightrope, and now it's getting thinner by the day with the confluence of these three factors, of course, you've discussed. And also one important point, I think the eventual goal of a summit is to arrive at a consensus. But too many cooks will obviously spoil it, right? So how will you arrive at a consensus? Especially, of course, G20 was a very different kind of a ball game. But how will you arrive at a consensus when you?
Question there, Anthony. I'm going to ask this to Ambassador
And where will the
Vora.
membership stop? Because there is also a neighbor vying for that membership. So I mean, these are very important questions.
No, I started by saying that the BRICS was a buffet, and Anthony says that too many cooks spoil the broth. Ambassador Vora, the fact that you have three countries who are not so positively aligned towards the West, could that actually kind of result in a consensus being eluded at the end of this magnificent summit that of the likes that we never thought possible a few months back?
Let me put it to you as our foreign minister has said. So I know him well. We are both from the same service. He was a few years my junior. I'm an old man. I'm 73. He's much younger. Well, he's a few years younger. And he's a million times smarter than I am. But what he said was very interesting. He said, we are not anti-Western.
Yes.
We are non-Western.
Right.
And if only these jokers across the Atlantic would understand this. Now, we've talked about the bilateral issues that we have. There are 193 members of the United Nations. Which two neighbors, and I've studied this in considerable depth, none of the two countries that adjoin each other that are contiguous that share a common border don't have problems.
Yes.
You can't name one. United States and Mexico, United States and Canada and Mexico and whoever, Canada and whoever, they all have these bilateral issues going on, border adjustments. So this is nothing to get worried about that if India and China have these issues and India and its neighbor have it. And as far as Pakistan or whatever that country's name is, as far as that is concerned, if he says, oh, I was going to get into BRICS, etc., but there is a process, you have to be invited, there's consensus, there's discussions, and forget about it. The Russian Deputy Prime Minister said, yes, it's a great idea, and everybody there started dancing the Bhangra till the fellow went and said, but wait, there has to be a consensus. My own feeling, sir, and this I say with some analysis and deep reflection, even if I offend some people, please forgive me. G20 was essentially a creation of the big economies of G7. They said, look, we can't handle these crises on our own, so we are the Brahmins, so let's bring in the Kshatriyas also. And that meant India came in, and Japan came in, and this fellow came in, and G20 was formed. But now the feeling seems to be that with the West and the East, so to speak, or the North and the South, there are so many divisions present in G20, it's not really able to deliver on the promises that it made. The only country that is very serious there is Bharat, and Bharat does deliver. And therefore, can BRICS be an alternative? My own feeling is, in the years ahead, you will see BRICS emerging as a very powerful and attractive alternative to the Western-dominated global system. In Africa, where I'm special advisor to 3 countries, I know they respect Russia's military strength and its willingness to train them and give them weapons. They take China's money, but they don't trust it. They think it's a ruthless predator. But India is totally respected. Because they say, you guys have never let us down. It's not your system. And when you talk of the world as one family and you welcome Africa into the G20 grouping, thank you very much, Bharat. We trust you, we love you. And I respond that we trust you and we love you too. I mean this, it's not just words. So my feeling is that BRICS is likely to become a competitor. You know, 6 champs were supposed to, but then Argentina decided that it didn't want to. And I think Saudi Arabia says, look, I'm still having bread.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Vora. I'm afraid we're completely out of time. Thanks for putting that in perspective. BRICS is the formation of the future. We're going to watch that BRICS summit at Kazan very closely, not only because it's Prime Minister Modi there with his mission BRICS, but also because, as our panelists have just told us, BRICS could be the multilateral body of the future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on the News 9 Plus show.